All right, back again.
I was wandering by your office.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take control of this particular episode of Pwned. Wandered by your office, and I heard you on the telephone with the press. Kansas. I think it was the Kansas City Star, something like that.
Tribune Star.
Tribune something, whatever. Yep. And I heard you talking about the ransomware attack against the public court. I want to talk about that.
Okay, let's do that.
So what's the story?
So the story is, and this is all public information at the moment, but news has come out and details are continuing to emerge that the Kansas public court system was impacted, suspected to be ransomware. And there's numerous court systems, platforms that are unavailable for public consumption. And as of today, the courts have said, courts are closed. We're not seeing anybody. Out of an overabundance of caution, they are not taking any meetings today, which is pretty interesting to me. It's like, it's not even like saying, I mean, we're going back to paper. It's like, we're just not even going to meet anybody either.
I judge this to be serious.
But
the jury's out.
Yeah.
So I think it's super interesting. The thing I love about it, right, is this intersection of cybersecurity and sort of physical security and jurisprudence. When they decided to shut it down, was it because they couldn't get at the records they needed to prosecute? Was it because they couldn't schedule jurors and juries and judges? Was it just because the whole thing is up in the air? They don't know what the hell's going on. You know, how do you feel it's impacting them? Is it like a real breakdown in the system's ability to function, or is it just a bunch of people running around going like, "Oh my God, what do we do now?"
Maybe all of the above, a little bit. But honestly, it seems like we're still pretty early. They're trying to figure out what is actually going on and the breadth and scope of impact. It seems to me like the paper route was evaluated. Should we just go back to paper and documentation? And nothing proves the value of systems rather than going back to 1970 and having to deal with pen and paper. I think it was also just keeping track of everything and not having clean processes to do that in a scalable way. So I'm speculating here that the motion right now is people figuring out how to continue operations in lieu of having technology. I'd expect for the next couple of weeks they're going to be back to paper.
Let me spring an adjacent or orthogonal question on you. So I remember talking to, might have been the Boston Globe or something, a number of years ago. One of the local police departments got knocked around, right? And they get ransomed. And all the questions they were asking was like, what happens? I said, have you guys stopped to think about chain of custody? The fact that they could actually encrypt this data meant they had access to it and they could change it. So if I was a defense attorney looking in at this chain of custody for the evidence that's maintained digitally, which is all the photographs of crime scenes, a lot of the records from the officers themselves are contained digitally. That's the only place they are. How do you prosecute and prove that those records haven't been changed when provably they have been? At very least, even if you find that one really nice ransomware group that actually gives you all your stuff back, it's a new file when it lands. So all this stuff is new, right? So how do you, as an attorney or as a district attorney or as a jury, judge whether or not chain of custody is held up?
It's an interesting question. I roll it back even further and basically saying, like, now you look at case law. I'm saying, okay, if we know we haven't been securing it here and we have commercially reasonable technology that's securing it, how do we know anything has ever actually been secured, right? Just put it in the wheelbarrow, roll it out the front door, dump it on the front lawn.
Nice. I hadn't even thought of that, right? Because there's unlikely to have been oddity kinds of things showing that you know absolutely everything that transacted.
Yeah, I mean, it's, for me, having a true chain of custody is black and white. Yeah. Like, it's vaulted or it is not, right? And here's the thing, right? If you're pushing all services out to the edge, right, a lot of cases it's not as vaulted as you might want it to be in these cases. And this, to your point, proves that this actually might not be.
Let me ask you a question, because when you interact with the press, you get a real sense for what the person on the street thinks about what's happening. So when you spoke with the reporter, were the questions sort of focused on how did this happen? Or was it focused on, are you seeing a lot of this? Was it focused on how should they have done better? What was like the reporter's focus as she was asking you questions?
Yeah, so I think the sentiments probably mirrors the public one, right? It's basically saying, oh, okay, like we see systems are offline, but what the heck does that mean? And a lot of the conversation was that, right? And so like the analogy that I gave here is like, it would be like getting a phone call from a friend. Like I give you a call. I'm like, Jack, hey, like I've got a water leak in my house, right? I have no idea what it is, but like my basement is filling with water. So you say, great. You come over and the front door is locked, right? And you can't get in the house. I'm like, Jack, like what's going on? You'd be like, I don't know. Like I can see there's water pouring on your front door, but I have no idea where it's coming from. So I can't even I can only speculate and guess what your issue could be.
Yeah.
Right. And it's the same thing here. It's saying systems are offline, but if it is ransomware, they are locked and you cannot get in to figure out what's next. Right. And those first couple of hours, first couple of days are like, they're pretty slow because you're figuring out how to break into the house so you can get access to your systems.
And what an amazing conundrum. As you're talking, I'm saying to myself, well, this is interesting. If they decide the only way to get the system of jurisprudence back online is to pay the attackers, you have courts paying criminals.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Interesting. And by federal definition, you are federal courts or state courts funding terrorism.
Correct.
Yeah.
That is not an excellent precedent. No. Not an excellent precedent. So did the courts have any idea of how long it's going to take them to get back to giving people just judgments and putting people in prison, what have you?
No, there's no ETA, no timeline. But here's also other kind of facets or components that we talked about is there's a few court systems that have been recently whacked.
Oh, really?
Recently, I'm forgetting the name off the top of my head, but there was one in northern Florida just a couple weeks ago that was whacked by ransomware by Black Cat, who took credit for the attack. In that attack, there was, and I'll have to find the article where I got this information from, and we can post it for folks. But it was like 2 terabytes of information that was lost. There was information about judges that were lost. There was information about court staff that was lost. And there was, I recall there was potentially some PII involved in there. I didn't see any court files referenced, but who knows? Anyway, what I was getting at is that was a couple weeks to get all systems back online. So I would imagine, I'm kind of speculating how this would go, but systems are offline.
Yep.
You have to keep things processing, right? And so there's going to be a little bit of a backlog in the sense where maybe you're offline for a couple of days. In the case of Kansas, saying like, our offices are just closed. We're not even people in person. So your schedules are delayed. But then you do everything in paper and then say, okay, systems are back online, schedules are back caught up. But then you have to reverse the past couple of weeks that you've been on paper and get all those things input. So like the opportunity cost is huge. It's like, to me, it's like you're in heavy traffic and the car in front of you like hits their brake lights, and you immediately also hit your brake lights, and the person behind you hits their brake lights. This creates this ripple effect that can be felt for miles. And I think this is going to be the case here and others. And so the question then comes up and saying, well, are court systems being targeted?
Yeah.
And saying, that's tough to say for sure. But here's the thing that we do know for sure is that these ransomware groups are fiscally motivated. We know that for a fact. And so really this becomes like a crime of opportunity, right? So if the collective ransomware operators see, there's opportunity in courts and there's been a couple that have fallen, it might be reasonable to think we could also go after all the court systems and have similar success, right? And so is this something we're saying, if you're a ransomware operator, well, if we hit all the other court systems really, really fast, maybe we can hit them before they have lessons learned and shared across each other. So that's kind of one aspect to it. But we're also entering into an interesting time in our political landscape and geopolitical landscape. I'm saying there's going to be people who are fiscally motivated, and whether it's courts or municipalities or businesses, they don't really care because all of their money is green.
Right on.
But then on the other hand, you have this other group of people. You say, okay, they care less about money. They want to make a point. And there are people who just like to see the world burn.
So chaos, sure.
Yep.
Sure.
So early indications is we're still seeing the former, not the latter. But if I'm a betting man, which I don't really bet, but
this is a guy who started a company from scratch with no job. Yeah.
Yeah. But hang on. But here's the thing. I didn't take other people's money, and I didn't make a bet on other people's money.
Truth.
I only bet on myself.
Truth.
So I would expect in time that we're going to see more of the latter, which is more of the chaos type of attackers.
Let me ask a different question about the same thing that just occurred to me, which is I think about courts and their data getting extracted and used. You gave the example in Northern Florida that they had stolen private information from court workers and what have you. And it led me to down the path that said, for these combination doxing and crypto ransomware kinds of attacks, for the shutting down the systems and the releasing the stuff, what happens to the court's responsibility for confidential informants, witnesses, cases that have been sealed, juvenile cases? I'm gonna ask the question, do you think it likely, and I'm not doing this as a setup because maybe you're like, yeah, but do you think it likely that they segmented the data so that ransomware attack would only see things that are possible to be seen and there was an enclave that protected everything else? Or do you think it's likely that a lot of those barriers that are put up to protect privacy where it's supposed to be protected probably fall down, and when you get a dox of one of these things, you're getting all that stuff?
I think it's the former. In that if you have informants, you have people in protective custody, that's a different agency that handles that. And let's just say it's the FBI.
Sure.
Right? It's the FBI systems and processes that handle all of that. Who's in protective custody, who's been an informant, all those things separate. We don't always see those things entering into the court system. And if they do, they're kind of somewhat becoming in the public eye anyway. So because of that, I think they're separate where there's a high level of sensitivity, which would be good.
Got it. So what about cases that are sealed? So somebody gets found guilty, they work out a deal, they say, please seal this case.
Yeah, I see that being a little bit different. I would hope that they would treat those things differently. Like don't store them in systems that are accessible from the internet. You got to air gap it a little bit.
It sort of speaks to a need for a new and evolving set of security requirements for courts or police stations or what have you. Anybody who handles that style of confidential record, it's a different kind of confidentiality. We're all used to having our stuff stolen all the time, right? It's Monday, my ID's been stolen again, right? My social security number's flying around there somewhere. But this is serious stuff. This relates to...
it could be life and death for people.
100%. Life and death, job, no job.
Yeah.
All of these kinds of things. And so maybe in the same way that the SEC continuously reevaluates different kinds of financial institutions and what they should do for cyber, I wonder if there's, and I'll go do some research, but I wonder if there's any similar model to push improving security in the law enforcement, community and the judicial community.
Yeah. So here's what I'll say. So I think there's probably a lot of people listening to this who say, oh, that's what CJIS is for, right? The CJIS is the Criminal Justice Information System. But CJIS only covers the national criminal databases in the interstate information system. This is not the exact name, but it's the III system. That only governs access to federal criminal databases, who has access to conduct criminal searches. It touches on CJI, criminal justice information, and how you're protecting that information, but it doesn't cover any of this stuff that we're talking about here. To me, this is way different. I would say in this bucket that we're talking about now would be chain of custody.
Yeah.
Right? It would be how can you 100% guarantee that these things have not been tampered with?
Right.
I mean, we have best practices. There's no firm regulation or like set of control standards like we see in other places that directly tie to these and that are being enforced the way that CJIS or IRS Pump 1075 or any of the NIST derivatives, especially if you're seeking an ATO, how those work. Like this is kind of like, it's an oversight. To me, it's overlooked. It's an opportunity for coverage. I don't see people talking about it, and I don't know if it's a matter of they don't really understand it. They don't understand how to enforce a chain of custody, like in real like technical ways. They don't understand it, or they just haven't been made aware of it. It's just kind of one of those things. Be like, oh yeah, and about that, we should include that too.
It's funny. I remember when HIPAA was coming out and going to the doctor's office. Right. And ordinarily, for those of you who are less than 100 years old, doctors used to have file rooms, which are these vertical stacks and stacks and stacks of all the patient's paper records. And I remember going in right after HIPAA came out. I'd done a little bit of work on it. And I'm like, hey, are you guys HIPAA? And they're like, absolutely. I said, great. So I filled out my little entrance form. They said, watch this. And they took the form and they went like this. And they put it face down. They said, that's our first step to HIPAA. So other people can't see your name if they see the file.
Nailed it.
And I think it was mainly because, and let's face it, it's gotten a lot better. The medical community, healthcare community has been working their asses off. But I think about that in the court system, just as antiquated, just as paper-oriented. So much of the physical evidence in court cases is physical evidence, right? They're going to have to go through that same process. And I can't imagine that a ton of it's happening yet. And if it has been digitized, I go back to that discussion in Massachusetts around what happens when local law enforcement loses all the digital assets. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I would think that going through this exercise here and everything that's happened over the last couple of years, as it starts to impact court systems and judicial systems more and more, people are going to start to pay more attention to it. Right. So maybe this is the beginning of change.
Another wonderful and positive note to end this podcast on. Thank you very much for sharing your press expertise and experience with us.
Yeah, it was quite prescient. I don't know. I'm out.
Excellent.
All right. If you listen to this episode, you like it, please share it with your friends. Please like us on social media, and we'll get you on the next episode.